On January 25th, 1986, in South Central Los Angeles, Herman Atkins, a disciplined student-athlete who enjoyed refurbishing lowrider Chevys, was paying a local mechanic for an engine rebuild when a robber snatched the money and took off on foot. Herman grabbed the mechanic's gun and chased the robber, firing warning shots into the air. The robber turned a corner, and Herman heard more gunshots. When he reached the corner, he happened upon another crime scene. There were cop cars and people wounded, and Herman, frightened, ditched the gun and retreated. After blanketing the area and questioning the mechanic, police wanted Atkins in connection with the shooting and wounding of 3 people, including 2 police officers, something Herman would be totally unaware of until authorities caught up with him while he was visiting family in Phoenix in November of that year. Fingerprints on the gun found at the crime scene did not match Herman, but with 2 newborn sons and prosecutors promising a guilty verdict and a terribly long sentence if he went to trial, Herman pled no contest to the charges in exchange for a lighter sentence. But this was just the beginning. On April 8th, 1986, while Herman Atkins' picture was being circulated by police in connection with the January 25th incident, an armed man forced a 23-year-old store clerk into the back room of her shop to perform oral sex on him in Lake Elsinore, California, a city Herman had never visited. During the rape, the assailant ejaculated and wiped his semen on her sweater, evidence that would later clear Herman's name. The armed robber and rapist fled with $130 in cash and the victim's jewelry. The victim and 2 other store clerks in the strip mall identified Herman as the assailant from his circulating wanted poster, with the prosecution relying on this ultimately mistaken eyewitness identification, an incentivized jailhouse snitch, and misleading serology findings. Herman was sentenced to 47 years plus 8 months for a crime he did not commit. This is Wrongful Conviction with Jason Flom. Hi, I'm Jason Flom, and I'm excited to tell you about a new 12-episode series hosted by famed attorneys Laura Nyrider and Steve Drizzen.
An interrogator's job is to make the suspect feel trapped.
Laura and Steve have devoted their careers to exposing the injustice of false confessions.
We know you were there. I can't lie about the evidence.
He can lie about the evidence, and he's lying about a lie.
Wrongful Conviction, False Confessions with Laura Nyrider and Steve Drizzen, February 19th, wherever you get your podcasts. 3 new cases, 3 claims of innocence, 1 last chance. The life-changing Starz docuseries Wrong Man is back. The work done by investigators in the first season saw 1 inmate exonerated and another who had his conviction overturned. With shocking new evidence uncovered in Season 2, can these new cases hope for a similar fate? Find out when Wrong Man from Emmy-winning filmmaker Joe Berlinger returns February 9th on Starz and the Starz app. Welcome back to Wrongful Conviction, everyone. Today, you're going to hear a story that has so many layers, so many twists and turns. It's a story that includes mistaken eyewitness identification, bad forensics, police misconduct. And in the end of the day, what it's got is redemption and forgiveness of a type that we have never covered and I've never heard of before. So I hope you're settled in because this is going to be an amazing ride. And with me is the star of our show, Herman Atkins. So Herman, welcome to Wrongful Conviction.
Well, thank you for having me.
And like I always say, I'm sorry you're here, but I'm glad you're here.
Yeah. You know, it's been an interesting journey down a long road.
It certainly has. And it all started on the morning of April 8th, 1986, a long time ago.
Correct.
86. That's the year the Mets won the World Series. That's how long ago that is.
Yes.
And I'll just set the stage, right? So sometime around 11:30 in the morning, a thin, young black man wearing a dark jacket, Reebok shoes, and a gold ring went into a shoe store in Lake Elsinore, California, which coincidentally happens to be a place you've never been to. We'll get into that. And he pretended to be interested in some merchandise, and then he, being the only customer in the store, he pulled a handgun and forced the clerk to perform oral sex on him, threatened to kill her. A horrible crime. Horrible crime. During the rape, the assailant ejaculated, and he left his semen on her sweater, so there was plenty of evidence to go on. And he took $130, making it a robbery and a rape. He also took her engagement ring and another ring. So her sweater was preserved as evidence, and that's when things get really crazy, right? Because you would seem like a very unlikely guy to be a suspect in this crime or any crime.
Yes.
And that's because you're your stepfather.
He was a highway patrol officer.
California Highway Patrol.
California Highway Patrol officer out of the Torrance Division. He raised me in such a way. I grew up in a regiment-type upbringing where there was rules, there was structures, there was high expectations, and there was a lot of pride from him as well as my mother. We lived at the time in South Central L.A., which would be considered middle class at the time.
And you were the third of 6 kids, right?
Yes.
And you had ideas of becoming a patrolman yourself.
Yes, I wanted to follow my father's footsteps. My father went to the military. He come from Jackson, Mississippi. And, it's horror stories after horror stories, racism, the whole shebang when he grew up. So he was one of the first out of 11 kids, 9 boys, the rest girls, to leave Jackson, Mississippi. And so given the stories that he told us, I wanted to follow in his footsteps. He left Jackson, Mississippi, went into the military, and then come from the military into law enforcement. So my path was already cut for me. I distinctly remember when the man went through the police academy and how I had to shine shoes and belt buckles and anything that had brass or chrome or silver to it.
And you were a star athlete as well. That comes back in the story later in a very unexpected way.
Yes. My whole life long, I had spent time in sports. He kept me and my brothers well into the community and social activities. He felt that was contribute to a strong foundation and give us the opportunity of learning what it means to work as a team, to follow leadership and eventually become leaders. And so I took to sports and excelled at it from Pop Warner all the way on up to high school.
Football, baseball, the whole shebang.
Yes.
And then this story, like I said, has a really crazy twist right at the beginning of it, actually, because as I said, you would seem to be an extremely unlikely guy to be a suspect in any crime.
Yes.
You were going to church, graduated high school, doing your thing, never been in trouble.
Yes.
And then one day, January 25th, 1986, a crazy thing happened.
I was having a engine rebuilt for a 1974 K5 Blazer, which was the in cars for teenagers at that time. I just turned 18. And the guy wanted $300 to rebuild the engine. I had given him $150 already when I took the engine to him. And he calls me up a week later and says, hey, the engine is complete. Come when you can. I couldn't come until at night. And when I went to go pay him the money, unbeknown to us, there was an individual watching us from across the street. And he approached the both of us, me and the auto mechanic, and the guy pulls out a gun and tells us we know what time it is and took the money that I was giving to the auto mechanic. He then took off, headed to the corner where 2 shots was fired, and the police were everywhere because they were up on the corner investigating a car accident. So everybody in the area fled. So did I, period. Shortly after that, I didn't think nothing of it.
Well, that's pure chaos. I mean, This is like that's a movie scene.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
At the time, I didn't think nothing of it. Went home, and at that particular time, I was expected to have my first child being born. I had impregnated a young lady who came for the summer, and she lived in Texas. So when she announced that the baby was about to be born, I went to Texas, and I was there for 3 months. And while there, my first son was born. And so while I was in Texas, this rape that happened in April transpired. So I wasn't even in the state of California when it had happened. Then I came back, and then I went to Arizona to visit family members there. While I was there, they have a project system. And so some guys inside the projects had caused harm to somebody else. Police were called, and everybody who was in the area was lined up as usual, and names were taken. When I gave them my name, they just ran the name and then came back and said, well, you're wanted in the city of Los Angeles, and you're wanted in Lake Elsinore for 2 counts of rape, 2 counts of oral copulation, 1 count of robbery, and 1 count of kidnap. And I'm like, wait a minute, y'all got the wrong guy. Stop it, And so they was like, no, we're going to extradite you back. No problem. They extradited me within days. When I got back to California, I was able to address the robbery incident and what have you. And the mistake I made at that particular time, I didn't tell them who was the perpetrator in the matter, because I actually knew the guy, and it was going to be one of those street justice things. I'll catch up with you. You're going to give me my money back because you're going to get beat up. And so that was what my thought process was. So I wound up having to plead nolo contendere to that whole situation, meaning you can hold me responsible, but I'm not admitting to what you claim I had done and what have you. I was the victim in the matter. And so the mere fact that it was a 2-year offense clearly tell you the weakness of the matter. So while we were addressing that, they then shipped me off to Riverside, California, where I learned about these charges. And so in April of 1986, a woman called out of Lake Elsinore, California, and said that she had just been raped and robbed. There was a police car in the vicinity, and she gave a quick description of the perpetrator. Young, thin-built black male, young, about 16 years of age. She said his teeth were small. I got big teeth. She said that he didn't have no scars on his hands. I've had that scar on my hand since, you see that scar right there? Yeah. I used to box, prize fight when I was young. I was an athlete. And so I had that scar there that ended the career. And she said that he had a ring on this exact finger, but she didn't describe the scar. She said that the perpetrator, the shoes he had on was actually a pair of Reeboks because it had a flag on it. And so she was able to identify this person to the 911 operator who gave that information to the police officer who was right there on the scene. He was like in the neighborhood. 2 minutes, he arrived at the scene of the crime. He said that they had combed the neighborhood looking for a male of this description. And here's the problem. In that area, it's all white. It's predominantly white. An
African-American man would have stuck out like a sore thumb.
Yes. At 11:30 in the morning
right.
in an outdoor strip mall. This is a busy place. They couldn't find the individual. A detective was then called out. The detective took the young lady to the hospital where DNA rape kit was formed. They gathered all of the evidence, and then they took her to the police station for further investigation. When they got her there, coincidentally, the wanted poster in the LA situation, the robbery incident where I was robbed, was laying on a table. And she looked at it and said, "This is the guy that raped me right here." And they was like, "Are you sure?" She said, "Yes, I'm real sure." And so when they were able to get me into the courtroom where I had an arraignment in Lake Elsinore, California, a place I had never been in, never knew anything about. I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles, and to this very day, I knew nothing about this city. And having me to come there for arraignment, I am brought out into the courtroom with nothing but white guys. I'm the only black guy on this chain of white guys. But the part that got me is we're in a jury box, right? And the DA's desk is about maybe 3 feet away from me. I mean, I can hear conversations being held with the DA and his party assistant. And they called my name up, and an arraignment had taken place, plead not guilty and what have you. He said, "Well, Mr. Atkins' attorney is not here yet, and so we'll put him on the back end and we'll proceed further." And so once the judge decided to do that, he then got up, went right into the audience. I'm looking at him, sits next to a woman and says, "Do you see the man that raped you?" She looked right over and said, "Yeah, that's him right there. I'm the only black guy." Now, you got the bailiff in back of me, and the bailiff tell me to look forward, or when he gets me back in the back, he's going to take his billy club and bust my head if I didn't continue to look forward. And all the while I'm looking at this, and I'm like, yeah, okay. So I can't wait for my attorney to get in so I can tell her about this in-court identification. And so when she did come in, by then the bell had already been rung. You can't unring it.
Right. And this, I want to really dwell on this for a second, yes. Right? Because you're the only black guy in a sea of white guys.
Yes.
I mean, you're fucked.
Yes, yes. And we went on with the arraignment, and the date was set for preliminary hearing, at which time I then learned all the ins and outs about the case and what have you. Now, once the preliminary hearing came about, they had stated that they had 3 witnesses that could put me at the scene of the crime. They had a informant who allegedly stopped the detective as he was leaving the county jail and said, "Hey, I heard your address in a rape